There are people in this world who do not choose their targets randomly. They do not stumble into your life by accident. They do not find you through bad luck or poor timing. They find you because of what you carry, a depth of feeling that most people will never understand, and a willingness to give that most people will never deserve. You were not chosen because you were weak. You were chosen because you were open. And in the eyes of someone who feeds on the energy of others, openness is not a virtue, it is an invitation. You have probably spent years believing that you were simply too sensitive, that you loved too hard, trusted too fast, forgave too easily. You may have even convinced yourself that the pattern of pain in your life was your fault, that something inside you was broken in a way that kept attracting the wrong people. But here is what no one ever told you. You were never attracting the wrong people by accident. You were being selected deliberately, strategically, not because of what was broken inside you, but because of what was powerful. The people who hurt you the most did not do so because they failed to see your worth. They did it precisely because they saw it clearly, immediately, and before you ever saw it yourself. That is not a flaw in your character. That is a failure in their integrity. And there is a difference between the two that will change everything once you understand it. You were told your whole life that feeling deeply was a problem to fix, that your sensitivity made you fragile, that your compassion made you naive. But what if the opposite was true? What if the very thing they used against you was the very thing they feared the most? What if your ability to feel was never your weakness, but the one thing they could never replicate, never match, and never control for long? Because here is the part of the story no one talks about. The person who tried to break you made a miscalculation, the single greatest miscalculation of their life. They assumed that because you were soft, you would stay down. They assumed that because you absorbed pain quietly, you would absorb it forever. They were wrong. And what is coming next is something they never prepared for. It started long before you had a name for it, long before you knew what empathy meant, or why you seemed to carry things that other children never even noticed. You were the one who walked into a room and felt the air change. You did not just see your mother's face, you felt what was behind it. You did not just hear the silence between your parents, you translated it. While other children were learning how to read words on a page, you were learning how to read people. And you were doing it not out of curiosity, but out of survival. No one taught you to do this. No one sat you down and said, here is how you carry the emotional weight of an entire household. You simply learned. You learned that when you stayed quiet, the tension decreased. You learned that when you smiled at the right moment, someone else's pain became a little more bearable. You learned that your feelings were not the priority, that your role in the family, in friendships, in every room you ever entered, was to stabilize, to absorb, to make sure everyone else was okay, even when you were falling apart inside. And the worst part is that you became so good at it. No one ever thought to ask if you were okay to. This is the part most people never understand about someone like you. They see the calm surface, they see the patience, the gentleness, the ability to listen without judgment. What they do not see is the cost. They do not see the nights you spent replaying someone else's problems in your mind because you could not let go of what they were feeling. They do not see the way you quietly abandoned your own needs because someone else's crisis always felt more urgent than your own pain. They do not see the exhaustion, the kind that sleep does not fix because it does not come from the body. It comes from years of holding space for people who never once held space for you. You became the friend everyone called at 2 in the morning, but no one checked on at 2 in the afternoon. You became the one who always knew what others needed but never learned how to ask for what you needed yourself. And somewhere along the way, a quiet belief took root inside you. A belief so deep that you may not have even recognized it as a belief. You started to think that your value was tied to your usefulness, that you were only worthy of love when you were helping, healing, solving, or saving, that if you ever stopped giving, people would stop staying. And so you kept going. You kept absorbing, kept adjusting, kept reading every room and every face and every shift in tone. You made yourself smaller so others could feel larger. You silenced your own voice so others could feel heard. You became an expert at understanding the human beings around you, their wounds, their patterns, their unspoken needs. But in doing so, something quietly slipped away. Something you did not even notice was gone until much later. You became so focused on understanding everyone else that you lost connection with the one person who needed your attention the most, yourself. And the hardest truth of all is this: you became so fluent in everyone else's pain that you forgot what it felt like to have someone understand yours. There is a question that has probably lived inside you for years, even if you never said it out loud. Why does this keep happening to me? Why do the same kinds of people keep finding their way into your life? The ones who take too much, give too little, and somehow always leave you questioning your own reality. You may have blamed yourself. You may have believed that something in you was fundamentally broken, that you were wired to choose the wrong people. But here is what you were never told. You did not choose them. They chose you, and they did so with far more precision than you ever realized. There is a science to this, a behavioral logic that operates beneath the surface of every social interaction. Certain people do not need months to figure out who you are. They do not need deep conversations or long histories. They read you in seconds, not because they are more intelligent, but because they are scanning for something specific. They are looking for signals, micro-behaviors, that reveal how you handle conflict, how quickly you forgive, how much responsibility you take for other people's emotions. And you, without knowing it, have been broadcasting those signals your entire life. Think about how you respond when someone raises their voice. You do not escalate. You soften. Think about what happens when someone accuses you of something unfair. You do not defend yourself with force. You reach for understanding even when none is being offered to you. Think about how quickly you apologize, not because you did something wrong, but because the discomfort of tension is something you cannot tolerate. These are not random habits. These are patterns, and to someone who operates through control and manipulation, these patterns are a language, one they are fluent in reading. This is what behavioral experts describe as targeting through pattern recognition. A person with narcissistic tendencies does not sit down and consciously decide to exploit you. It is more instinctive than that. They are drawn to your agreeableness the way a predator in nature is drawn to specific movement patterns. Your willingness to see the best in people tells them you will overlook early warning signs. Your tendency to take accountability tells them you will blame yourself before you ever blame them. Your emotional responsiveness tells them they will always have access to a reaction, and reaction is the currency of control. And here is where it becomes painful. The very things that make you a deeply good human being, your compassion, your patience, your desire to understand rather than judge, those are the exact qualities that were being used as entry points. Not because those qualities are weaknesses. They are not. But because no one ever taught you that those qualities needed protection. No one told you that being kind without boundaries is not generosity, it is exposure. No one taught you the difference between being open-hearted and being unguarded. This is not a flaw in who you are. This is a gap in what you were taught. You were given the gift of depth, but never handed the tools to protect it. And so your greatest qualities did not just define your character, they became a map. A map that led the wrong people directly to the most unprotected parts of who you are. But understanding this map is the first step toward redrawing it entirely. It did not happen the way you expected it to. There was no explosion, no dramatic walkout, no moment where you stood in front of someone and finally said everything you had been holding inside for years. It was quieter than that, much quieter, and that is exactly what made it so powerful. Because the moment that changed everything did not come with noise, it came with silence. A silence that started somewhere deep inside you. A silence that, for the first time, was not about keeping the peace. It was about something finally breaking, not you, but the pattern that had been running your life without your permission. Maybe it happened in the middle of a conversation. Maybe you were apologizing again, not because you had done anything wrong, but because that is what you always did. You apologized to keep things calm. You apologized to make the other person feel comfortable. You apologized because somewhere along the way, you learned that your peace was less important than theirs. And maybe, in the middle of that apology, something inside you paused. Not anger, not resentment, something deeper, something that had been watching quietly for a very long time. And in that pause, a single thought surfaced, a thought so clear it almost frightened you. Why am I apologizing for being hurt by someone who is not even sorry? Or maybe it happened later. Maybe it was the moment you heard your own voice defending someone who had never once defended you. You were explaining their behavior to a friend, finding reasons for their cruelty, building a case for why they were not really that bad. And in the middle of that defense, you heard yourself, really heard yourself. And for the first time, you did not recognize the person speaking, because that person was protecting someone who had been quietly dismantling them. And the weight of that recognition did not make you cry. It made you stop. That is the moment no one talks about. Not the moment you fell apart. You had already done that 100 times. This was different. This was the moment you stopped bending, not because you became hard, not because you stopped caring, but because something inside you simply reached its limit, a limit you did not even know existed until it was crossed. It was as if your entire emotional system had been running on a program that no longer made sense. A program that said, give more, forgive faster, try harder, love louder. And for the first time, that program did not just stall. It crashed, completely, irreversibly. And what replaced it was not rage. It was not bitterness. It was clarity. A devastating, bone-deep clarity that changed the way you saw everything. You looked back at the people you had poured yourself into, and you finally saw the truth. Not the version of the truth you had been constructing to survive, but the real truth. You had been giving your energy to people who were not just failing to receive it, they were draining it deliberately. You had been pouring into vessels that had holes drilled into the bottom long before you arrived, and no amount of love, patience, or understanding was ever going to fill them. Not because you were not enough, but because they were never designed to hold what you were offering. That realization did not come with closure. It came with grief. The grief of wasted years, the grief of misplaced loyalty, the grief of finally understanding that your kindness had been used as a tool against you by the very people you thought you were helping. But beneath that grief, something else was rising, something unfamiliar, something steady. It was not hope. It was too grounded for that. It was not confidence. It was too quiet. It was something closer to refusal, a deep, immovable refusal to keep living the same story and calling it love. And for the first time in your life, that refusal did not feel like giving up. It felt like waking up. The people around you expected one of two things. They expected you to stay, to keep giving, keep forgiving, keep absorbing everything they threw at you the way you always had. Or they expected you to leave loudly with anger, with accusations, with some kind of dramatic break that they could point to and call proof that you were the unstable one. But you did neither. You did something that no one was prepared for. You went quiet, not the kind of quiet that comes from defeat. Not the silence of someone who has been broken into submission. This was a different silence entirely. This was the silence of someone who had stopped performing. And that silence, that calm, deliberate, unmistakable withdrawal of energy, unsettled people, more than any argument ever could. It started in small ways that only you noticed. You stopped over where you once would have written long messages defending your feelings, carefully choosing every word to avoid being misunderstood. You simply said less. Not because you had nothing to say, but because you realized that the people who needed paragraphs to understand your pain were never going to understand it regardless. You stopped chasing clarity from people who were deliberately keeping things unclear. You stopped asking why did you do that when you already knew the answer. They did it because you had always allowed it, and then something deeper shifted. The behaviors that had defined your entire relational life began to fall away, not through force or discipline, but through awareness. Where you once rushed to fix tension, you now let it sit. Where you once abandoned your own position the moment someone pushed back, you held still, not with aggression, not with walls, but with a groundedness that surprised even you. You were no longer adjusting yourself to make other people comfortable. You were letting them experience the discomfort of your honesty, and you were not rushing in to rescue them from it. This is the shift that no one teaches you about. It is not about becoming cold. It is not about shutting people out or learning to stop caring. It is about something far more radical than that. It is about learning to trust yourself, not the version of yourself that other people shaped, not the version that was trained to doubt every instinct that did not align with someone else's narrative. The real you, the one who always knew something was wrong but kept being told it was all in your head. That version of you was never confused. That version was being overruled. What began to emerge was something that can only be described as emotional self-authority. The point where you stop asking for permission to feel what you feel. The point where your boundaries are no longer up for discussion, no longer softened to avoid someone else's reaction, no longer presented as gentle requests that can be negotiated down to nothing. Your boundaries became statements, not loud, not hostile, just final. And the difference between who you were before and who you were becoming could be measured. In one simple change, you stopped explaining your limits and started enforcing them. The people who were used to the old version of you did not understand this. They tested, they pushed, they tried guilt, they tried silence, they tried charm, and when none of it worked, They did what people always do when they lose access to someone they once controlled. They called you changed. They said you were distant. They said you were cold. And maybe, for a moment, you wondered if they were right. But then you felt that quiet, steady presence inside you that had been growing since the moment you stopped abandoning yourself. And you realized something that changed everything. You were not becoming someone new. You were simply no longer willing to be someone you never were. The reconstruction had already begun. And the most powerful part of it was this: it did not require anyone else's approval to continue. There is a version of strength the world does not recognize because it does not look the way strength is supposed to look. It is not loud. It is not aggressive. It does not announce itself when it enters a room. It simply watches. It listens. It reads what is not being said with the same precision that others use to read what is. And by the time most people realize what they are dealing with, it is already too late. Not because you have done anything to them, but because you can no longer be made to do anything against yourself. That is the kind of strength that lives inside an empath who has finally stopped apologizing for what they see. What most people never understood about your sensitivity is that it was never just emotion. It was always perception. You were never simply feeling things deeply. You were processing information that most people do not even know exists. The micro-expression that flickers across someone's face for less than half a second before they rearrange it into a smile. The slight shift in vocal tone that tells you someone is lying before they finish their sentence. The energy in a room that contradicts every word being spoken inside it. You have always noticed these things. The difference is that before, you noticed them and then talked yourself out of what they meant. You felt the incongruence, and then you chose to believe the words instead of the signal beneath them. That is what changed. You stopped overriding your own awareness, and the moment you did, everything became visible. This is what discernment really is. It is not suspicion. It is not paranoia. It is not the habit of assuming the worst in people. It is the refusal to ignore what you already know. It is the ability to feel everything, every shift, every tension, every unspoken intention, and instead of reacting to it, choosing what to do with it. That is the upgrade no one saw coming. Not the ability to feel less, but the ability to feel everything and still respond with precision, to observe without absorbing, to understand without losing yourself in someone else's chaos. This is not emotional shutdown. This is emotional mastery, and it is the single most disorienting thing a manipulative person can encounter, because the tools they relied on no longer work. The guilt that once made you shrink now passes through you like noise. The silence they once used to punish you is now the very weapon you wield with more skill than they ever could. The emotional chaos they created to keep you off balance now meets something they have never faced from you before. Stillness, not cold stillness, not detached indifference, a warm, grounded, fully aware stillness that says, I see exactly what you are doing, and I am choosing not to engage. That stillness is more powerful than any confrontation, because confrontation gives them a role to play. Stillness gives them nothing, and nothing is the one thing a person who thrives on control cannot manipulate. You have not become heartless. That is what they will say. That is how they will try to frame the change they see in you, as coldness, as cruelty, as a loss of the very thing that made you who you were. But the truth is the opposite. You have not stopped feeling. You have stopped bleeding for people who were never wounded. You have not closed your heart. You have simply stopped handing the keys to people who used access as a weapon. What you have become is something they were never prepared to face. An empath with clarity. An empath with boundaries. An empath who feels everything and is no longer controlled by any of it. You did not lose your softness. You sharpened it. And now it cuts in the direction you choose. There is a lie you carried with you for longer than you should have. It was the belief that what you went through was evidence that something was wrong with you. That every betrayal, every night spent questioning your own mind, every moment you gave more than you had left, all of it pointed to some fundamental flaw in who you were. You believed you were broken, that the pain you kept encountering was a reflection of your weakness. But here is what you could not see while you were still inside it. You were never being broken. You were being forged, and there is a difference between the two that changes the meaning of everything. You have survived. Look at what tried to destroy you. Not just the people, but the patterns, the constant the emotional exhaustion, the years of silencing your own instincts to keep peace with people who were at war with your well-being, the moments where you sat alone, wondering if you were the problem, replaying conversations in your mind, searching for the place where you went wrong. Those moments were not breakdowns. They were every single one of them was stripping away something that did not belong to you, a belief, a tolerance, a version of love that was never love at all. And what was left after all of it was not less of you. It was the most honest version of you that has ever existed. The person you were before was extraordinary in many ways, open, generous, willing to believe in people, long past the point where belief was earned. But that person was also unguarded. That person gave without filters, loved without conditions, and trusted without evidence, not because they were foolish, but because no one had yet shown them the cost of having no walls in a world full of people who mistake openness for opportunity. That version of you was not weak, but that version of you was unfinished. And now look at who you have become. You are still open, but by choice, not by default. You are still kind, but your kindness now has architecture. It has doors. It has boundaries that do not bend just because someone raises their voice or lowers their mask. You are still capable of deep love, but you no longer confuse sacrifice with devotion. You no longer pour yourself empty to prove that you are enough. You have become what very few people in this world ever become. Someone who feels everything and is still standing. Not standing because they are numb. Standing because they are rooted in something that no one else gave them and no one else can take away. This is what the people who tried to break you never understood. They assumed your depth was a disadvantage. They thought that because you felt so much, you could be overwhelmed into submission. But depth does not work that way. You cannot break someone whose inner world runs deeper than your ability to reach. You can disturb the surface. You can create waves, but you will never touch the floor. And that is where the empath's real power has always lived. Not on the surface where the reactions happen, but in the depths where identity is formed and reformation begins without anyone watching. You did not survive despite your sensitivity. You evolved because of it. Every painful chapter was fuel. Every betrayal was a teacher dressed in cruelty. And the person standing on the other side of all that fire is not damaged. They are refined, unrecognizable to the people who once thought they knew how to control you. And that is not a tragedy. That is the most complete form of justice you will ever know. You did not find this by accident. Nothing about your presence here in this moment is random. You are here because something inside you has already shifted. Something you may not yet have the full language for, but something you have felt quietly building for weeks, maybe months, maybe longer. You did not need someone to tell you that you are changing. You already knew. What you needed was confirmation that what you are feeling is real. That the silence you have chosen is not emptiness, it is evolution. That the distance others have noticed in you is not coldness, it is clarity. And now you have that confirmation, not because someone handed it to you, but because every word you just heard described a journey you have already been walking. This is not the beginning of who you are becoming. It is the recognition of who you have already begun to be. The empath who once bent for everyone. The one who absorbed every emotion in the room and carried it home like it belonged to them. The one who loved in ways that left them empty and still called it purpose. That version of you served its role. It taught you what you needed to learn, but it is no longer running your life. What is running your life now is something quieter, something steadier, something that does not need anyone's approval to exist. If what you heard today felt like your story being told back to you in a voice you have never heard before, then do one thing. Leave a single word in the comments, just one word, that describes where you are in this journey right now. Not where you were, not where you are going. Where you are right now, in this moment. And if you want to continue walking this path, not for entertainment, not for content, but for the slow, deliberate unraveling of everything you were taught to hide about yourself, then stay. Subscribe, not because you are being asked to, but because something in you already knows this is where you are supposed to be. They thought your silence meant surrender. They thought your softness meant you could be shaped into whatever they needed. They thought that if they pushed hard enough and long enough, you would collapse into someone easier to control. But they were wrong. They chose the wrong empath to break. And now, that empath chooses differently.